are simultaneously extended. So I wonder if after that analysis about the networks, you could go back to how that's going to transform into citizenship rights, and your comment about how states have to produce programs for the greater number to survive. Are those two things related? And just a tiny comment, the issue here, we've talked a lot about the rule of law, and Bruce and Nathan, and in an institutional framework, but the whole notion of property in this country and the rule of law in this country is incredibly complicated. And so when we talk about the property lists, with a huge informal sector, a huge construction, but the informality is not just about the poor, it's also about the rich. So patronage, informality, what is property and what are the property lists? It's extremely complicated and interesting in that way.
Thank you. I'm Terry Carl from Stanford University. This question is primarily to Al Stephan, but I would really appreciate it if all of you can comment on it. And that is that we now know that in the three issues that you talked about, which was really the economy, the electoral system, and the role of religion and democracy, the role of women is extremely important in every one of those, and particularly when it comes to social policy and looking at issues like health care, how budgets are distributed, etc. We also know now that the only countries that have any kind of serious parity, of gender parity in the political system have done so through quotas or through certain kinds of agreements like the one you described, Al, in Tunisia. And my question is that we know that those countries that don't do that end up in very serious long-term issues around some of these, not just social policy, but also gender equity issues. And so my question is really to all of you, are there any examples that you see in the Arab world? Al, can you tell us more about how the Tunisia experiment came about? Anything in Central Europe or anywhere else that you would like to discuss that show the extreme importance of integrating women into the political system? And I just, one question to people in the audience who are Egyptian specialists. I have heard that there is an agreement here in the legislature for, I would call it affirmative action for workers and peasants. Has there been a discussion of women's quotas at all? Has that been rejected? Has it been encouraged in any way? These tend to be temporary and they later disappear, but they are, in fact, the road we know. Thank you.
Yes, but in the second round, Al, could you react? And please keep it short so that you can have a second round, please.
Okay, I'll respond very briefly to the three questions that were raised. Clem Moore asked the question about, are there any lessons about civil society? I think if we look at civil society as an oppositional force is often the celebrity of transitions. And people value it more, feel it's more legitimate, and there's a slight danger, it can be in some cases a very real danger, that they delegitimate political activity. I think many of the activists on Tahrir Square, I was asked to meet with many of them and talk about failed democratic transitions and successful. They, both here and in Tunisia, very, very strong anti-political society orientation. So civil society is useful for destroying an authoritarian regime, but if you're actually going to build a democracy, there has to be more attention to constitutions, parties, electoral laws, and so on. And virtually not one person I talked to said they were going to run for election. They just said, you know, that's not what we're about. And so that civil society opposition is a problem. And then if we're looking at civil society in opposition, being leaderless is a huge asset, because the Burmese monks had about 15 key leaders. Every single one of them, after a while, were arrested in their bed because they knew where they slept and they were leaders. Being uncapturable here is a huge advantage. But as soon as you start talking about whether you're going to support and create democratic institutions, then the leaderlessness becomes, that's a problem that must be transcended. The question on quotas, Terry is right. It's hugely important. There are different types of quotas. For example, in Pakistan has about a 40% difference between male and female literacy. Whereas in Indonesia, a focus on citizenship education, it is 90, between the people 13 and 17 years old, 99% of males are literate, 98% of females are literate. Now that didn't happen just by chance. There was a huge discussion about that and focus on it. So I think you're right. But there are different types of priorities. It's not only election. It's a really paying attention to who goes to school and at what level and how the access to it.
Thank you. Paul?
There's no doubt that both civil society and sort of virtual society played a very, very important role and will probably continue to do so. I mean, about what Stephan said about, you know, the problem of civil society between that and political society, it's a question to many civil society activists now that they have democracy. Should they run for parliament? Should they? And some are choosing to do so and many are not. I myself have run for parliament in Lebanon, and you know, the big difference that in civil society your opinion matters and you decide for yourself. When you're running for election, it's the voter's opinion that matters, and you're in a completely different business. They're both necessary businesses. In brief, I would say that civil society and virtual society, as it's constituted currently, particularly among young people in the Arab world, needs to continue to be autonomous, independent of the other political and very legitimate processes, because it has a different set of interests, has a different set of perspectives, and those need to be heard, whereas elections have their own dynamics and might go in other directions. On the women's issue, no doubt that's a fundamental issue. I think the key reform, in addition to quotas and so on at the highest level, is really to institutionalize that downwards. Because society won't change by having 30 women in a parliament. It'll change if you have 78,000 women serving in elected offices in every village and region. And that's, again, where local and regional politics, you know, all politics is local, as they say. And if you don't go downwards, you're not going to succeed upwards.
Thank you, Paul. David?
Yes, but those are great questions, and I'll turn to them. But I wanted to make sure I understood something that Al said in his answer. Al, did you say that civil society organizations are very important in the moment of transition, and they're not so important later on? Because if you did, I would disagree.
No, I totally disagree. I think civil society, all your talk about horizontal and vertical accountability, a major part of that demand. No, I argue that civil society is important at all stages of the transition. But if there's a problem in some of them, it's that it's so much the celebrity of the transition that it builds in almost a certain normative dislike by some of the activists of political society. And that can be a big problem.
That can be a problem. Okay. I'll take the questions in a little bit in reverse order. The question, maybe I didn't make myself clear exactly what the starting point was. Right? The starting point is that the state owns everything and that citizens have virtually no citizenship rights. And so the problem is, how do you get the property to, not from the state into, well, at least some holders, and the question is how many stakeholders, while giving people these citizenship rights to vote, to replace incumbents and so on. Now, what's also happening is that everybody wants to marketize. There's virtually nobody that doesn't want to do that, and there's kind of a common agreement about how it happens. So in the beginning, you have state and, well, economy and polity are completely so intertwined that they're not separated. And so what you want to do is separate politics from economics and have, you know, just move, that's the way to separate. Now, it turns out, and this is another study that we do using these data, because I didn't tell you, that in addition to knowing all of the organizational ownership ties and all of the personnel ties, that is, knowing all the lists of all the senior managers and the boards of directors, we also have the names of every politician in Hungary, every political office holder in this period. And so we can map the ties between parties and firms. So everybody agrees that you need to separate state and politics, state and economy. But to be a political party, you need resources. And you need information about what's going on in the economy. And to be a firm, you need information about what's happening in the state. And so parties turn out need to rely on firms for access to resources to be able to compete in the political sphere. And firms need to rely and make alliances with parties to get information to be able to compete in the economic sphere. And what we show is that although there is an institutional separation of parties and firms, there is an organizational re-entanglement. And I would, you have that paper's under review at the American Sociological Review. I'm happy to send it to you. So politics doesn't stop being played out. It has new consequences when it is political party competition. Now, this question was so wonderful because I took it as an answer to my question. I thought this is a very wonderful, first start, or maybe not first, you've been thinking about this, but it's a very clear statement about what might be the challenge in Egypt. So, you say, how do we bring the networks out of the shady to make them accountable when we have neither vertical nor horizontal democracy already in place? So how do you achieve kind of horizontal and vertical democracy at the same time that you do the specification? So if I understand it also right, and this comes back to something that's implicit in that question, that we need to think about more of the differences between the Hungarian or East European cases in here, so that there are many more. So first, that there have already been prior experiences with privatization. And many actors in the political sphere and in economics may be sort of burned by that, because what it meant is that there are already winners from the earlier stages of economic change. Unlike the Hungarian, where, you have winners in the old system, but you don't have the new kinds of business interest winners. So there are already winners. There are agents who have capital, who have, firms, who have access to be able to give and contribute to political parties. And moreover, we have a set of actors who hold, well, it's interesting. Is it state property or not state property when the military itself engages in economic business transactions? I understand this is like as much as 30% of the economy. So how to deal with that at a time when there are also many more losers, in the sense that, poverty is much greater, inequality is much greater. So one would think that there may be some opportunities there to enlist those who are impoverished to become active agents in favor of real economic reform that brings these actors that you mentioned, right, out of the shadows and into the light.
Thank you, David. First session, we started 20 minutes late, and we had to cut short the discussion. This time we started on time, and yet in fact, we came to the end of the session. And my colleagues in charge of the organization are calling on me and repeating and reminding me that we have to stop at 12:30. However, I will take 5 more minutes. But 5 more minutes will allow for 2 interventions, 1 minute each, and then 1 minute for each of the panels. So I will give the floor to those who have not spoken in the first session. This is 1 intervention, please, but for 1 minute, please, just for 1 minute.
It's more of a response, actually, to the question about how the Court of Women could be implemented in Egypt in the upcoming election. So far, and I'm testing the preferences of parties. Broadly speaking, not many parties are enthusiastic about the idea. The main party that is not totally counter-arguing against it is the Muslim Brotherhood Party, because, of course, the way the women quota were implemented before, there were very large constituencies. In order to win, of course, one had to have a political party organization up and running, and they are the most organized force they were, and to a certain extent they are now. So far, the draft that has been circulated does not refer definitely to the way it's going to be, if it's ever going to be implemented. I don't think it's going to be implemented in the same way as it was in the past, because then one would have, along with the mixed system, 3 ballot papers, one for a single-member district.
Excuse me.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that, but,
Then,
but maybe you can continue the discussion after the session, because yes.
George. Yeah, I think he's going to get a question. George.
I just had a quick question to Dr. Stephan, and actually it's more of a reflection on the current case sort of now in Egypt. Actually, the discussion on constitutional reform is very much tied to a discussion on democracy and Islam regarding the Article 2 of the Constitution. And Article 2 of the Constitution, which stipulates that Sharia sort of or Islam, is the source of legislation, has been implemented most readily on the personal status laws, which are the laws sort of governing household rights. And those laws are very heavy regarding their view of women. They're very discriminatory. They're very, very oppressive. So I think when we discuss Islam and democracy, well, on a theoretical level, it is true that both sort of work together, and that you could have obviously Muslim majority countries being Islamic. I think that we really need to focus on the fact that the state does not necessarily need to have a religion, or the state needs to be sort of separated from religion. This was actually a point brought up also by Dr. Abdullahi Naim, who was here just a couple of weeks ago. So perhaps if you could reflect on not just whether Muslim majority states can be democratic, but also whether or how we can divorce sort of the state from having a religion.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. I apologize to all others who have asked for the floor. I really apologize, but there is a sequence of events, and we have to catch up. So 1 minute for Al, 1 minute for Paul, and 1 minute for David.
The question of the twin tolerations, what I try to convey by that is there has to be a space that democracy really, and that means voters and individuals, determine key political outcomes. And the twin toleration for religion just means that they can participate in the area. Now, if either group violates other people's rights, then that becomes a huge issue and must be contested. The question of thinking that there's no relationship with a specific religion, obviously, if it's no longer a civic state, that's a huge problem. But we have to just think of the fact that you're almost assuming that there's no official religion in democracies. Well, at least we have to have a cautionary note. Every single Scandinavian country who were the most progressive, most democratic in much of the 20th century had an established evangelical Lutheran church. Okay? So the question is, how did that become established, but twin toleration? You can have many types of things. And so I think we shouldn't focus on one. If you can get very clear, I mean, the fact that many people actually want and demanding that the military write the Constitution because they're frightened of the election results, well, first of all, that's fundamentally anti-democratic. Fight the election, I would think. And then actually the election results, with the exception of Algeria, and a very, very tentative exception of the range of fundamentalist Islamic vote of all of the things I've studied, and it's more than 30 elections, is about 17% to 4%. That's the range. Because if you have 35% of the population is young, and if women don't want everything commanded by them, and if kids who are young are interested in their music and so on, that's the range. So in Indonesia it started 21 in the first election, 11 the second election for hardline fundamentalist party, and 7% the last one. That's the norm. The most recent election in Bangladesh, 3%. In no election in Pakistan did they ever get more than 17% without the military help.
Thank you very much, Al. Paul?
So this, I find too much terrorism about this.
Thanks a lot, and I'm sorry to Paul?
No, I'm
David?
I can do it in a minute. Uncertainty is an opportunity. Constrained power is an enabled power. Don't have political sociologists and political scientists tell you that things are impossible. Because they told, and for example, even Margaret Thatcher told the people of Eastern Europe, you know, it's not possible to tear down the Berlin Wall. And it came down. And there are people who are telling you because of geopolitical reasons, you can't do X or Y. But some of those things have already happened here in this 100 meters from where we sit. So we all are your students learning from you about the new possibilities.
Thank you very much, David. I think this is a very good end to this conference. We thank you very much for having been so faithful for the last 3 days. We have learned a lot about democratic transitions.
Food poisoning, so I missed the Mexican.
The conference comes to an end. The title of the conference is from Tahrir, Revolution or Democratic Transition, and a question mark. I hope the answer is revolution and democratic transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.